Okay, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today. His name is Mike Ruppert, former LAPD officer, narcotics squad, achieved a certain amount of fame and notoriety in confronting CIA Director Deutsch. You're going to see that on C-SPAN video here in a few minutes. And he's here to talk to us about drugs, drug distribution here in Los Angeles area, and the involvement of the CIA. For the class members, this is something we've been looking at for the past month, and hopefully Mike's presentation will help fill in any gaps that the readings and the videos that you've seen already have left in your understanding of this. So Mike, for that brief introduction.
Brief introduction. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're going to play a little video first so you can, it'll kind of get your blood working so that we can move into the bigger topics here. I especially want to thank Professor Andrus for having me here today, and hopefully we're going to have some fun and paint a map for you, a map that'll not only work in understanding how the drug trade works in the United States, but how it drives international conflict, especially in Latin America. And we're going to cover all that today after we see this little fun shot here. Let me turn off the light. That's not the light. That's the light.
I am a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, and I work South Central Los Angeles, and I will tell you, Director Deutsch, emphatically,
and just say further into the mic, so his mic don't seem to be...
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
Obviously, that is an answer for a lot of you. Now, can you please?
I refer...
All right, now, can you please?
I refer to...
Wait a minute. Wait a minute here. Wait a minute. If you don't like what's going on here, please leave now. No, leave now, because there are others who do want to hear what's going on in this room. Will you please take your seats? I will come back to you as we roll back across to the center section.
Director Deutsch, I will refer you to 3 specific agency operations known as Amadeus, Pegasus, and Watchtower. I have Watchtower documents heavily redacted by the agency. I was personally exposed to CIA operations and recruited by CIA personnel who attempted to recruit me in the late 70s to become involved in protecting agency drug operations in this country. I have been trying to get this out for 18 years, and I have the evidence. My question for you is very specific, sir. If in the course of the IG's investigations and Fred Hitz's work, you come across evidence of severely criminal activity,
let him speak
and it's classified, will you use that classification to hide the criminal activity, or will you tell the American people the truth?
All right, you want to hear the response first from Congressman Julian Dixon and then from the director. Wait a minute. From your, I'm sorry, sir. I will allow the director to speak first and then Congressman Julian Dixon.
If you have information about CIA illegal activity in drugs, you should immediately bring that information to wherever you want, but let me suggest 3 places. The Los Angeles Police Department,
I'm sorry, others want to hear this answer. I am sorry, others want to hear this answer.
It is your choice, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Inspector General, or office of one of your Congress persons from this. Did that 18 years ago, sir, and I got shot at for it.
Wait a minute, sir. Wait a minute. Wait a minute, sir.
And
Sir, you have not gotten the mic yet. You are not. But wait a minute, then don't speak out of turn.
let me say something else. If this information turns up wrongdoing, we will bring the people to justice and make them accountable.
All right, Congressman Dixon.
Thank you, sir, for coming.
Let's just get this
a
snippet from
minute
Dixon,
here.
then we'll cut it.
I thought you did not want to be here, but now that you are here, please let us hear and listen. Thank you very much.
Sir, I want to thank you for coming. You were at the last meeting. The staff probably has the spelling of your name wrong, but we would like to talk to you. We have been looking for a couple of days for you, and we want to make sure that you contact the committee, because obviously you have some valuable information. If you want to give it to me privately, if you want to hand it to that aide where I can contact you this evening, please do it. Don't let us get away without getting a contact for you.
Thank you, sir.
Pass it up to him now, so everyone can see that I got it. That would be fine.
Thank you, sir. And for the record,
Please keep the noise down so that we can hear and we can get answers.
For the record, my name is Mike Ruppert, R-U-P-P-E-R-T. I did bring this information out 18 years ago, and I got shot at and forced out of LAPD because of it. I've been on the record for 18 years nonstop, and I'll be happy to give you, Congressman, anything that I have.
Thank you.
That last gentleman speaking was Congressman Julian Dixon, who died this morning suddenly of a heart attack in Washington, D.C. To his immediate right was Congresswoman Jane Harman of Torrance, both of whom were Democratic Party members of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. John Deutsch, the CIA director, who was at Locke High School, was Bill Clinton's director of CIA, who resigned about 3 months after this event at Locke High School. My good friend Dick Gregory, the black comedian and activist, called me and said that he had checked with sources in Washington and said that John Deutsch, who was angling to become Secretary of Defense, lost his appointment as Secretary of Defense because of the way he performed. And what you saw there was an absolutely unbelievable, bizarre moment from the Twilight Zone when a member of the ruling elite was confronted with the absolute transparency of the lunacy of his own actions. Okay? We're going to take you through hard evidence today, which is going to paint for you an economic map about the drug trade here in South Central Los Angeles, and about the imminent, and I mean imminent, war in Colombia, and about the history of the CIA's use of the drug trade and how it all has to do with Wall Street. But first, let me do a little backup here. So I want to tell you how I happened to get into this and why I'm here, which has to do with the expertise or bad luck that I happen to bring to bear on this. The photograph that you're looking at on the board was taken by my mother. The caption on the back reads, 937 Secretarial Plane Trip to Moscow Conference, Tehran, Iran, 11/4/1943. For those of you who don't know, that was around the date of the Tehran Conference with Franklin Roosevelt, Chiang Kai-shek, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. My mother was a cryptographer for the Army Security Agency attached to Secretary of State Cordell Hull. I have another photograph here that she took.
Oh, Mike, could you put that one up one more time?
You want to get a zoom on it?
Yeah. This
Okay?
Yeah.
The next one that I'm putting up, and I'll hold that up for you. By the way, there's the one of the airplane so you can all see it. The next one that I'm holding up.
And could you favor to the
To the left?
no, I'm not you, but the slide.
Ah,
I'll get it. No, the other way. Yeah, right there. Just favor that.
my other left. Okay. Church of St. Basil, Red Square, Moscow, October 28th, 1943. Okay. The reasons why I'm in this is not because I was an LA policeman. This is not something that every LA cop knows. My father, who was in the Air Force during the Second War in Korea, went on to work for Martin Marietta on projects that put up the Titan 3C and all the CIA's keyhole spy satellites. Relatives of my father were OSS, Office of Strategic Services, during the Second World War, and have retired from the Central Intelligence Agency. I was born in Washington, D.C. Everybody in my family was connected to the intelligence community. My mother later went to work for NSA, National Security Agency. I used to come home from school and say, "Mom, what's for dinner?" And she'd say, "I can't tell you." It's a joke. It's a joke. I had a Q clearance when I was a teenager simply because I lived in the same house with my parents, because my dad could have left a briefcase open or my mom could have talked about work she did regarding U.S. intelligence during the Second World War and the early days of the Cold War. A Q clearance, by the way, is above top secret. I didn't even know I had it until I started interning for the Los Angeles Police Department in 1969 when I was a freshman at UCLA. Nobody shot me. That's good. I like that. Okay. When I started interning for LAPD, I knew I wanted to be a cop. I didn't want to go to Vietnam. I wanted to serve, and LAPD had a really good reputation in those days. And the funny thing happened, though, was that when I became a police student worker at LAPD, they ran a background check on me and almost immediately found out my family history. And LAPD is infiltrated heavily by the Central Intelligence Agency. And I will tell you, and that's a whole separate lecture, that the CIA routinely places covert agents, either deep cover case officers or contract agents, in all major police departments throughout the country. You should know from the National Security Act of 1947 that created CIA that it is illegal for the CIA to operate inside the United States. The way the agency gets around that is by placing case officers inside local police departments who then have access to and the ability to operate domestically. I will tell you that Daryl Gates has been CIA his whole life, and we can come to that later on. I'll tell you that his driver bodyguard, John Xavier Vach, who I had worked with at one point, was convicted of moonlighting for the Central Intelligence Agency on city time in 1985. It's a matter of public record. Daryl Gates stated publicly in 1992 during the Bush-Clinton-Perot campaign that the only position he, Daryl Gates, would accept in the second Bush administration would be Director of Central Intelligence. Now, let me ask you, what are Daryl Gates' qualifications to be Director of Central Intelligence? This is the man who gave us the insurrection, as I call it, of 1992. Okay? Now, what happened with me was this. I was an honor student in political science at UCLA from 69 to 73. My closest friend, Craig Fuller, was chosen to intern for Governor Ronald Reagan at the same time that I was chosen to intern for Chief Ed Davis at the Los Angeles Police Department. Craig Fuller went on to become the Chief of Staff to Vice President George Bush from 1985 through 1991. Or excuse me, 85 through 91. The CIA did an official recruitment with me on spring break 1973, right before I graduated. I was magna cum laude, Dean's List. They flew me back to Washington. They said, "Mike, you've got everything we want. You're in great shape. You know LAPD. They love you. You've got the clearances. Your family is all Republican, blah, blah, blah. We want you to join the agency and become a case officer." Now, in the Central Intelligence Agency, a case officer is the highest rung on the food chain. It is this level of employment status for those of you who are Mission Impossible fans where the secretary cannot disavow you. You, in a sense, have a certain carte blanche. You have the cachet and the aegis of the agency to back you up. And for that reason, case officers don't do certain dirty work themselves. Beneath case officers, there are contract agents, career agents, contract agents, foreign contractors, employees of proprietary companies, informants, and all these get CIA paychecks, but they are not case officers. The recruitment pitch in Washington, D.C. was for me to become a case officer with CIA, and they would then put me back through the Los Angeles Police Academy and groom me to become a high-ranking member of LAPD, eventually possibly chief, and that would be my cover. I turned them down. It was illegal. In 1973, there were revelations about CIA's involvement with Salvador Allende in Chile, the murder and the overthrow of the Allende government, IT&T's involvement down there. CIA was getting some bad press. It scared me. I thought if the agency was going to offer me a job, they would make me James Bond and send me to Paris so that I could chase pretty women and drink wine. I mean, that's, I'm sorry, I was a product of American media at the time. So I turned him down. I came back, I joined the LA Police Academy, was valedictorian for 3 classes, and I hit the streets in the jungle, which is not far from here. It was in Wilshire Division in those days. If you know where the jungle is, it's right over by Crenshaw and Martin Luther King. That was my area. I specialized in narcotics, was in 2 shootings, got all these commendations, loved my job. And I met and fell in love with a very beautiful woman who was a CIA career agent. That recruitment was a little bit different from the first one. That's also a joke. God, you guys are dead. It was a lot more fun. It lasted longer. I fell in love with her. We got engaged. We moved in together. But over a period of time, she began to disclose to me that even though she knew high-ranking people at LAPD, she also knew members of organized crime, the mafia. She had grown up, she was an American, but she was raised here in Pacific Palisades with a niece of the Shah of Iran, Minu Hagstrom, daughter of the Shah's twin sister Ashraf. She had connections in military intelligence, and she was always arranging for things to move in Hawaii, in Baja California, in Del Rio, Texas, but most especially in New Orleans. She was arranging for large quantities of firearms to leave the United States, and surprisingly, large quantities of drugs to come into the United States. Now, being a narc, I said, I will not get involved in anything that overlooks narcotics. I will not do it. I don't care who's doing it. And that eventually caused the end of our relationship. In the summer of 1977, after I'd been loaned to Organized Crime Intelligence Division unofficially, my captain, Jesse Brewer, God rest his soul, who was our police commissioner here for a long time, first African-American police commissioner in the city, arranged for me to track Teddy down. Her name was Teddy, in New Orleans, and I personally saw her with scrambler phones, night vision devices, receiving communications from Naval and Air Force NCOs, and arranging for tons of weapons to leave to go to Iran and Iraq to arm the Kurdish tribesmen there. That's one of the largest opium growing regions in the world. And for large quantities of heroin to be brought into the port of New Orleans from oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. Some operated by Zapata Oil, but others just basically operated by the CIA or major oil companies. I tried to report, I broke off the relationship with her and I tried to report it. I said my government's dealing drugs and it's wrong. I was eventually forced out of LAPD in the end of November 1978. I received tape-recorded death threats. I was being burglarized. I had been shot at in New Orleans. I took a tape-recorded death threat, passed it to an aide to Chief Gates and said, I need to see the chief, not knowing that he was CIA. And the message that I got back was, the chief is busy. He can give you 5 or 10 minutes in a week to 10 days if you're still alive. Would you like to make an appointment? So I resigned November 30th, 78. I did get some press. The date here is October 18th, 1981. 2 front page stories, 2 weeks in a row in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner when we had a good paper in this country. That's a bad picture of Teddy, a bad picture of me. It said I was the most intelligent cop in LAPD. For years I asked myself, if that was the case, why was I homeless? Why was I unemployable? Why did LAPD ruin every job that I tried to get? And how come I was having all these troubles? But you can see I got a lot of press. This was the same length article the following Sunday, which resulted on October 26th, about a month after this. You can see the return address is the White House. Craig Fuller, my college classmate, inviting me into the basement of the West Wing of the White House. He was then assistant to President Reagan for Cabinet Affairs, the number 2 man under Ed Meese. I sat in his office, which faced the corner of 17th and Pennsylvania, close to Ronnie's, right under Ronnie's butt. Actually, Ronnie's butt was on the other side. And I said, CIA is dealing drugs and it's wrong. Well, in point of fact, what was happening is that the agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, had been dealing drugs since before it was the Central Intelligence Agency. It had been dealing drugs since 1943 when the OSS sprang Vito Genovese from prison to help the Allies invade Sicily. It had been dealing drugs since it used Vito Genovese and Lucky Luciano to bust Italian strikebreakers in the Italian coast and French labor leaders along the southern coast of France. It had been an unbroken chain, but a whole paradigm shift, a whole evolution in the drug trade occurred in the Reagan years. Oliver North was just getting warmed up. Craig wouldn't say anything to me about CIA dealing drugs. He said, "That's nice, Mike." Disheartened, because it's a very strange feeling to leave the West Wing of the White House and say, okay, where do I go now? Think about that for a second. I called a few days later the managing editor of the Washington Star, also another disappeared paper in this country of corporate media. And I got right through to the managing editor, and I told him about CIA and drugs. And you know what he said? He said, "Mike, that's the worst kept secret in Washington. Everybody knows that. How come you don't know that?" Now, I now publish From the Wilderness, which is a newsletter, and I have been at this, as I said, for a long time. These are issues of my newsletter, and if any of you are interested in subscribing or obtaining the issues, Andrea over here, Andrea, wave, is capable of taking subscriptions. Right now we're selling back issues. It's read by 13 members of Congress, the intelligence committees of both houses, professors at 10 universities, including the illustrious and illumined David Andrus of SC, and subscribers in 11 countries. And some of the things that we do we acquire and we publish documents like this one. Now, in the late 80s and early 90s, 26 C-130 Hercules aircraft disappeared out of the Department of Defense. They didn't really disappear. They were given to the U.S. Forest Service, supposedly to fight fires in America, you know, out in Colorado or wherever there were forest fires. The problem was that some of these C-130s were turning up in Pakistan, Iran, Mexico, Panama, Colombia, and they were loaded with drugs. They weren't loaded with fire retardant chemicals, okay? It became something of a small scandal, resulting in a number of federal actions. And this is a memo to George Leonard, Associate Chief of the Forest Service, from Kenneth Cohen, Assistant General Counsel. I'll just read you one little sentence down here. Apparently DOD, that's the Department of Defense, thinks that by having the Forest Service as the intermediary in future aircraft, if future aircraft are used in drug smuggling, the Forest Service and not DOD will suffer the adverse publicity. It's in black and white. They have meetings in the government about who's going to take the blame if they're caught smuggling drugs. Now, why is that? Okay. Why is that? $250 billion a year out of the $500 billion a year that circulates in the world economy from drug trade alone are laundered through the United States economy. $250 billion a year. If I were to ask you guys, and I'm going to ask you right now, what are the 4 states in the United States that are responsible for most of the drugs that come into the country? Call them out. Florida. You got to stop. New York, California, Texas, okay? Everybody understands the concept of money laundering, right? It's not legal to take 500 pounds of $20 bills and buy a house. You have to kind of prove that you got it from some legal source of income. Okay, 4 largest states for the importation of drugs. What's number 1, by the way? Florida. New York. Okay. What's the closest point of the United States to Colombia? No. Puerto Rico, 450 miles. Once the drugs make it from Colombia to Puerto Rico, it's the same as if they're in Kansas City. U.S. Customs doesn't inspect anything. The single largest flow of goods and services anywhere in the hemisphere is from Puerto Rico to New York City. Okay? Which 4 states now are